The escape pod screamed through the atmosphere of 7, trailing fire and debris. Inside, Sung gripped the harness straps as red warning lights flashed across every surface. His survey ship was gone, torn apart by the spatial anomaly that had appeared from nowhere. 23 crew members had been aboard. Now he was alone, falling toward an unknown moon in uncharted space. The pod slammed into crystalline forest with bone-jarring force. Trees shattered like glass around him, their fragments catching the light of the distant blue sun. Sung's head cracked against the headrest despite the harness. Everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, pain radiated through his left arm and ribs. The pod's emergency systems had failed. Smoke filled the cramped interior. He released the harness with shaking fingers and kicked open the damaged hatch. Cool air rushed in, clearing his lungs. He tumbled out onto ground covered in glittering crystal shards. Sung lay there for several minutes, staring up at a purple sky streaked with orange clouds. His communicator was dead. His emergency beacon showed critical damage. The survival kit had been crushed during impact. He had a broken arm, possibly cracked ribs, and no way to contact anyone. The nearest human colony was 15,000 light-years away. He forced himself to stand. The crystalline forest stretched in every direction, beautiful and alien. The trees grew in impossible spirals, their translucent trunks refracting light into rainbow patterns. Strange sounds echoed through the woods, clicks and whistles from creatures he could not see. Sung salvaged what he could from the pod: a damaged tablet, basic tools, water purification tablets, and a small medical kit. Then he started walking. For 3 days, he survived on filtered water from a nearby stream and emergency rations from the pod. His arm swelled despite the makeshift splint. Fever came and went. On the 4th day, he found the structure. It stood in a clearing, a dome made of some metal that seemed to shift colors in the light. Not human construction. The architecture was too elegant, too organic. Sung approached cautiously, his good hand gripping a salvaged cutting torch as a weapon. The entrance dilated open at his approach, recognizing any life form. Inside, he found equipment he did not recognize. Holographic displays flickered with alien symbols. Delicate instruments lined the walls. In the center of the room, a figure spun around at his entrance. She was clearly not human. Her skin had a faint silver sheen, and her eyes were larger than human eyes, colored a deep violet. She stood taller than him by several inches, with an elegant build and features that were alien yet strangely beautiful. She wore clothing that seemed to flow like liquid metal. When she saw him, she gasped and grabbed something from the workbench. Sung raised his empty hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The woman pointed her device at him, some kind of scanner or weapon. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Sung swayed, his fever spiking. He collapsed to his knees. The woman hesitated, then lowered her device. She approached carefully and helped him to a bench. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. She examined his broken arm with what seemed like professional interest, making concerned sounds in her melodic language. Sung tried to explain he meant no harm, but she clearly understood nothing he said. Over the following days, an unlikely partnership formed. The woman, who gestured for him to call her, was clearly a scientist or researcher. She had medical knowledge and treated his arm with some kind of cellular regeneration device. The bone knitted faster than any human medicine could achieve. She provided him with food from her supplies, though it tasted strange to his human palate. In return, Sung helped her with equipment repairs. One of her primary research instruments had suffered damage from a recent storm. His engineering training gave him insight into problems that frustrated her. They worked together using gestures, drawings, and slowly developing a shared vocabulary of basic words and concepts. Sung learned that was studying the moon's unique ecosystem. The crystalline forests were actually living organisms, a hybrid of plant and mineral life found nowhere else. She showed him holographic recordings of incredible phenomena: crystal trees that sang in harmonic frequencies, mineral flowers that bloomed and died in patterns that followed mathematical sequences. He taught her about human technology, sketching diagrams of Earth ships and explaining basic engineering principles. She absorbed everything with obvious intelligence and curiosity. Her people clearly possessed advanced technology far beyond current human capabilities, yet she seemed fascinated by human solutions to technical problems. 6 weeks after the crash, Sung's communicator finally powered on. He had been working on it every spare moment, scavenging parts from damaged equipment with her permission. The moment it activated, he felt a surge of hope. He could send a distress signal. Rescue might come. Then he bent over her microscope examining crystal samples, humming softly in her musical language. Something twisted in his chest. During the long evenings, they had developed their own way of communicating. She had shown him star charts of her home system. He had played her music from his tablet's damaged memory banks, watching her face light up with wonder at human symphonies. She had saved his life. More than that, she had given him companionship in isolation. He realized he did not want to leave without knowing more about her, without understanding who she really was. That night, using their improvised language and elaborate gestures, revealed her secret. She showed him images on her holographic display, massive cities floating above a purple ocean, grand palaces made of living crystal, and a woman who resembled wearing an elaborate crown. Through careful pantomiming, she made him understand that she was not simply a scientist. She was royalty, a princess who had fled her duties to pursue forbidden research. Sung stared at her in shock. She smiled sadly and explained through gestures that her people had strict rules for their royal family. Science was for common citizens, not for those born to rule. She had stolen away to this remote moon to pursue her passion, knowing she would eventually be found and brought home. They sat together that night under Seven's twin moons, each lost in thought about their respective worlds. Sung realized that despite coming from different species, different planets, they shared something important. They were both outcasts in their own way, both seeking something their societies said they could not have. He reached out and took her hand. She looked at him with those violet eyes, surprised but not pulling away. Her skin felt warm despite its silver sheen. In that moment, something changed between them. The language barrier no longer seemed so insurmountable. They sat together in comfortable silence, two lost souls finding unexpected connection on a distant moon. The warning came 3 weeks later. Instruments detected massive solar activity building in the system's star. She showed Sung the data with obvious fear in her violet eyes. Even without understanding all the alien symbols, he could read the graphs clearly enough. A solar flare of catastrophic magnitude would strike 7 in approximately 3 months. The moon's atmospheric shield could handle normal solar radiation, but this flare would be different. Pulled up simulations showing the shield collapsing, the surface bombarded with enough radiation to sterilize all life. Her research station had no backup shelter rated for that level of exposure. His damaged escape pod certainly offered no protection. They had to build something, or they would die. Sung studied the station's resources carefully. Had construction materials for her research equipment, including reinforced panels designed to withstand extreme conditions. The nearby caves, carved deep into the moon's mineral formations, could provide natural shielding. If they could seal off a section of cave and reinforce it properly, they might survive. Work began immediately. Every day, they hauled equipment and materials to a cave system half a kilometer from the research station. Strength surprised him. Despite her elegant appearance, she could carry loads that would strain a human male. Her people were adapted to higher gravity than Earth's. They worked from dawn until darkness fell, when the twin moons rose to bathe the landscape in silver light. Sung designed a reinforced door using principles of human engineering combined with materials. programmed her atmospheric processors to create a sustainable environment within the sealed cave. They installed her power generator, water recyclers, and food synthesizers. During the long hours of work, their communication improved dramatically. Learned basic English words while Sung picked up phrases. They developed a hybrid language, mixing vocabulary from both sources with gestures and expressions. The conversations grew deeper, more personal. One evening, exhausted from moving heavy panels, they rested at the cave entrance watching the sunset. The blue sun sank below the horizon, painting the crystal forest in shades of amber and gold. Spoke quietly about her, Prime, describing oceans that sang and cities where buildings grew from engineered coral. She told him about her mother, Queen Wu, a stern ruler who valued tradition above all else. About her sisters who had accepted their royal duties without question. About her own struggle between duty and passion, the loneliness of being different even among her own people. Sung shared his own story. Growing up in the orbital colonies around Mars, always dreaming of exploring beyond human space. Joining the colonial fleet against his family's wishes. The excitement of his first survey mission that had ended in disaster. The guilt of being the only survivor. Reached out and touched his face gently. Her fingers traced the scar on his forehead from the crash. She said something in that he did not understand, but her tone was clear. He was not responsible for the deaths of his crew. The universe was vast and dangerous, and sometimes people died despite everyone's best efforts. They sat closer that night, shoulder to shoulder, sharing warmth as the temperature dropped. The twin moons rose higher, casting double shadows across the crystal forest. Sung felt something shift inside him. This was more than survival partnership, more than friendship between outcasts. 2 weeks before the projected solar flare, the shelter was nearly complete. They had sealed the cave entrance with reinforced doors, installed all critical systems, and stockpiled enough supplies for 6 months. Calculations showed they would need to stay sealed inside for at least 90 days for radiation levels to become safe again. 90 days in close quarters with someone he was beginning to love. That night asked him to walk with her through the crystal forest. She seemed nervous, her elegant fingers twisting together. They walked in silence until they reached a clearing where the crystalline trees grew in a perfect circle. The twin moons hung directly overhead, their light creating prismatic effects through the transparent trunks. Turned to face him and spoke carefully in their hybrid language. She told him about a tradition called the eternity binding. It was more than marriage, more than any human concept of partnership. It was a spiritual union that connected souls across lifetimes. Her people believed that some beings were meant to find each other, no matter the distance or differences between them. She pulled out 2 small crystals that pulsed with inner light. These were harmonic crystals, she explained, grown in the deep caves of Prime. When 2 people performed the eternity binding, the crystals would attune to their neural patterns, creating a bond that could never be broken. Sung stared at the crystals, then at her face. She looked vulnerable, hopeful, and terrified all at once. He understood what she was asking. This was not some casual arrangement. This was a commitment that her people considered sacred and permanent. He thought about his old life. His career with the colonial fleet was over. Even if rescue came, he could never return to what he had been. The man who had crashed on this moon had died in that escape pod. Someone new had been born in the weeks since. He really looked at her. An alien princess who had given up everything to pursue her dreams. A scientist with brilliant mind and gentle hands. Someone who had saved his life and then given him a reason to keep living. She was beautiful, intelligent, kind, and brave. The fact that she was not human suddenly seemed like the least important detail about her. Sung took one of the crystals. It felt warm in his palm, vibrating gently. He spoke in careful words she had taught him over the past weeks. He promised to stand with her, to protect her, to share his life with her for as long as the stars burned. eyes filled with tears. She took his hand and guided him through the ritual. They stood facing each other under the twin moons. They pressed the crystals to their foreheads while speaking ancient words in her language. The crystals blazed with sudden light, so bright Sung had to close his eyes. He felt something surge through him, a connection forming between his mind and hers. For just a moment, he sensed her emotions: joy, love, relief, fear, hope, all swirling together in overwhelming intensity. Then the sensation faded to a gentle warmth, a constant awareness of her presence at the edge of his consciousness. When they opened their eyes, the crystals had changed. They no longer pulsed with generic light but glowed with colors specific to each of them. Crystals shone silver-violet, matching her eyes. Sung's burned deep amber like Earth's sun. They attached the crystals to chains and hung them around each other's necks, smiled at him, radiant in the moonlight, and kissed him. It was his first kiss with someone not human, and it was perfect. The solar flare arrived on schedule. They sealed themselves in the cave with supplies, equipment, and each other. The radiation storm raged outside for 17 days, intense enough that even through meters of rock they could hear the atmospheric shield crackling and failing. They survived together in the shelter, taught him science. Sung showed her human engineering. They talked, worked, ate, slept, and grew closer with each passing day. The bond between them strengthened, becoming as natural as breathing. When the radiation finally cleared enough for them to emerge, they stood together at the cave entrance looking out at a changed landscape. The crystal forest had been scorched, many trees shattered, but life remained. Already, new growth pushed through the damaged areas. They rebuilt the research station together. Months passed in quiet contentment. Sung no longer thought about rescue. This moon, this cave, this woman had become his home. The ships arrived without warning. One moment, Sung and were working in the rebuilt research station. The next, the sky filled with massive vessels that seemed to fold space around them. Their quantum drives left ripples in reality that made his eyes hurt to witness. Saw them and went pale. She grabbed Sung's hands, speaking rapidly in. Her family had found her. They had come to take her home. She tried to explain about their bond, about the eternity binding, but the royal guards who materialized inside the station did not listen. They were massive beings, even larger than, armored in living metal that shifted and flowed. They spoke to her in harsh, commanding tones, argued back, her voice rising with desperation. She pointed to the crystal at her neck, showed them the matching one Sung wore. One guard reached out and yanked it from her neck, breaking the chain. Sung lunged forward. Two guards grabbed him effortlessly, holding him immobile, screamed his name. She fought against the guards restraining her, stronger than he had ever seen her, but there were too many. They carried her toward the shimmering portal their technology had opened. She looked back at him one last time, violet eyes full of tears. She shouted something in, words he did not fully understand but felt in his heart. Then she was gone, pulled through the portal. The ships vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving him alone in the station. Sung collapsed to his knees. The crystal around his neck had gone dark and cold. The warmth of their bond had been severed, leaving an aching emptiness in his mind. He picked up her broken crystal from the floor, clutching it until his hands bled. 3 months later, a Terran patrol ship detected his distress beacon. They found him in the research station, thin and hollow-eyed but alive. The rescuers marveled at his survival, at the alien technology he had learned to operate, at his story of living alone on an uncharted moon for over a year. He told them nothing about. That pain was too private, too precious to share with strangers. They brought him back to Earth. Doctors examined him, psychologists evaluated him, and administrators debriefed him endlessly. The colonial fleet offered him commendations, promotion, a new posting. He accepted mechanically, moving through life like a ghost. At night, he would hold both crystals and remember. The way laughed at his terrible pronunciation of words. The concentration on her face when she worked, the warmth of her hand in his under the twin moons. He had lost her, and the universe felt empty. On Prime faced her mother's fury. Queen Wu was a formidable woman, tall and commanding, her silver skin marked with the traditional patterns of royal authority. She had ruled the empire for 3 centuries, maintaining tradition and order with an iron will. She raged at for disappearing, for abandoning her duties, for bringing shame to the royal family, was confined to the palace, her movements restricted, her communications monitored. Guards stood at every door. She was a prisoner in her own home. Worse than the confinement was the isolation. Her mother refused to discuss Seven. Her sisters avoided her, embarrassed by her rebellion. The court whispered behind their hands, calling her the disgraced princess. Only soon, her childhood friend and lady-in-waiting remained loyal. 2 months after her return, realized something was wrong. Her body was changing in ways that should not be possible. Women could only conceive when a true spiritual bond existed, when 2 souls connected on the deepest level. The eternity binding she had performed with Sung had been real, recognized by her very biology. She was pregnant with a human's child. Terror seized her. If her mother discovered this, the consequences would be catastrophic. A hybrid child, product of union with an alien born to the royal family. It was unprecedented, unthinkable, scandalous beyond measure. Soon helped her hide the truth. They used flowing robes to conceal her changing shape. They made excuses to avoid palace physicians. They created a secret room deep in the residential wing where could prepare for the birth. The months passed in agonizing slowness. Felt the child growing within her, a presence that reminded her constantly of Sung. She would touch the broken crystal she had managed to hide from the guards and whisper to the baby about its father, about his kindness, his intelligence, his bravery, about how he had survived impossible odds and learned to love someone completely different from himself. The birth came on a night when the palace slept. Soon attended her alone in the hidden room. The labor was difficult, the hybrid nature of the child causing complications, but endured. When she finally held her daughter, she wept with mingled joy and sorrow. The baby was beautiful. She had silver-tinted skin but Sung's warmer undertones. Her eyes were violet like all, but shaped more like human eyes. Her features blended both species perfectly. Named her Da, a name that meant great kindness in the old language. Da was extraordinary from the beginning. She developed faster than either human or children. By 6 months, she could walk. By 1 year, she spoke in complete sentences using both languages. She showed psionic sensitivity like children, but also demonstrated human adaptability and creativity. Kept her hidden in the secret chambers. Only soon knew the truth. She told her daughter stories every night about the stars, about different worlds, about a brave human engineer who lived somewhere out there in the vast universe. Da listened with intense focus, absorbing every detail. The child had inherited the psionic gifts of her mother's people. She could sense emotions, feel the presence of other beings, and sometimes catch glimpses of distant thoughts. As she grew, these abilities strengthened. She became fixated on her father, this man she had never met but felt connected to through stories, and through the broken crystal her mother had saved. On Earth, Sung buried himself in work. He became an explorer again, taking dangerous assignments to uncharted systems. Other officers avoided such missions, but he volunteered eagerly. Each expedition was an excuse to gather information, to study maps of space, to learn everything he could about the empire that had taken from him. He investigated the eternity binding, accessing what few records existed about culture. Horror and guilt consumed him when he learned the truth. It was not simply a marriage ceremony. It was a soul bond that people considered sacred and permanent. By accepting it without fully understanding, he had bound to him in ways that would affect her entire life. He had to find her. He had to know if she was safe, if she had forgiven him for his ignorance, if there was any chance they could be together again. 5 years after their separation, opportunity finally came. The Terran Federation and Empire agreed to historic peace negotiations after centuries of Cold War. A diplomatic mission would travel to Prime. Sung called in every favor, used every connection, and manipulated his impressive service record to secure a position on the mission. He was going to find her, no matter what it took. On Prime, Da was now 5 years old. She had grown into a precocious, curious child who asked endless questions and showed remarkable intelligence. She remained hidden in the secret chambers, but the restriction chafed. She wanted to see the world beyond the walls, to meet the people her mother described. More than anything, she wanted to find her father. The crystal her mother had shown her resonated with something deep inside her. Through her developing psionic abilities, she could sometimes sense a distant presence, a warmth that called to her across the stars. She knew, with the certainty of a child who had never been wrong about such things, that her father was coming. She just had to wait. The Terran diplomatic vessel descended through Prime's atmosphere. Sung pressed his face to the viewport, watching the alien world materialize below. Purple oceans stretched across the surface, dotted with floating cities that glowed like jewels. Crystal spires rose kilometers into the sky, connected by bridges of light. It was beautiful beyond anything Earth had produced. His heart pounded. Somewhere down there lived. After 5 years of separation, of longing, of not knowing if she was safe or happy or even alive, he was finally on the same world as her. The crystal around his neck, dark since the guards had taken her, suddenly pulsed with faint warmth. He gasped, touching it with shaking fingers. Could she sense his presence too? The palace complex sprawled across an entire island, a masterpiece of living architecture where buildings seemed to grow from the ground like organic structures. The Terran delegation was housed in a diplomatic wing, but the welcoming reception would take place in the grand ceremonial gardens. Sung dressed in his formal uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. 5 years of dangerous service had earned him decorations and recognition. He needed to project confidence, authority. He was no longer the desperate survivor stranded on a remote moon. He was a decorated officer of the Terran colonial fleet, and he had every right to be here. The gardens were magnificent. Paths wound through flowers that sang in harmonic frequencies, past fountains that gravity, beneath trees with leaves that changed color based on viewer emotions. Nobles mingled with Terran diplomats, the two species eyeing each other with mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Sung searched every face, looking for the one that mattered. He saw the queen from a distance, an imposing figure surrounded by advisors and guards. She was taller than most, her bearing radiating authority and power. He avoided her vicinity carefully, keeping to the edges of the reception. Then he sensed it, that warmth in his mind growing stronger. The crystal at his neck blazed with sudden heat against his skin. He turned, scanning the crowd desperately. She was there, standing on a balcony overlooking the gardens, wearing robes of flowing silver, her violet eyes scanning the gathering below. 5 years had not changed her beauty, though there was sadness in her face that had not been there before. Their eyes met across the distance. The world seemed to stop. He saw her sway, one hand going to her throat where no crystal hung anymore. Her lips formed his name, though he could not hear it. Before either could move, before Sung could think of how to reach her, a small figure darted through the crowd near him. A child, maybe 5 years old, with skin that shimmered silver but carried warmer tones. She wore a simple dress and had escaped whoever was supposed to be watching her. The child stopped directly in front of Sung, staring up at him with eyes that were unmistakably violet but shaped differently than pure eyes. She tilted her head, studying him with intense focus. Then she reached out and touched the crystal hanging around his neck. The contact sent a shock through him. He felt her presence in his mind, a psionic touch that was gentle but powerful. The child smiled, radiant with joy and recognition. She spoke in perfect English with a child's voice. "I knew you would come. I told Mama you would come find us." The Korean word for father. Sung's mind went blank with shock. This child, this beautiful hybrid child, was calling him father. He stared at her, seeing in her features but also something of himself. The shape of her eyes, the tone of her skin, the curiosity in her expression. "I am Duh," the child continued happily. "Mama told me all about you, about Seven and the crystal forest and the twin moons. She showed me your crystal, the one that matches yours. I could feel you getting closer. I had to come see." Royal guards were approaching now, drawn by the commotion. Sung knelt to the child's level, hands shaking. "Duh," he whispered. Is your mother." "Yes, and you are my father. I knew it the moment I sensed you. The bond tells me so." She pulled out a chain from inside her dress. On it hung a crystal the one had worn, now glowing with warmth. Before Sung could respond, someone pushed through the gathering crowd. Ran toward them, her face pale with terror and desperate hope. She reached them just as the guards arrived, throwing herself between Sung and the armored soldiers. She spoke rapidly then switched to English for his benefit. "He is no threat. This is my personal matter. Leave us." The guards hesitated, looking uncertain. A crowd had gathered, nobles and diplomats watching the scene with intense interest. Whispers spread like wildfire. The disgraced princess, a human, a child who resembled them both. Then a commanding voice cut through the murmurs. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" The crowd parted like water. Queen Wu strode forward, flanked by her personal guard. She was even more imposing up close, her presence filling the space with barely contained power. Her eyes took in the scene, her daughter, a human officer, and the child who clung to them both. The queen's gaze fixed on Duh, and something flickered across her face. Shock, recognition, understanding. Her eyes widened as she truly looked at the child for the first time, seeing what the clothing and isolation had hidden until now. The queen said slowly, her voice dangerously quiet, "Who is this child?" Lifted her chin, pulling de close. "Her name is Duh, mother. She is your granddaughter." The garden fell absolutely silent. Even the singing flowers seemed to quiet. Queen Wu's silver skin flushed darker with emotion. Her eyes moved from the child to Sung Tu and back again. "Guards," she commanded, "clear the gardens. Bring these three to the throne room, now." They were escorted through the palace in tense silence. De held both Sung's hand and, seeming unconcerned by the gravity of the situation. His face was set in determined lines. Sung felt like he was walking to his execution. The throne room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. The queen sat on a throne that seemed carved from a single massive crystal. Her advisors lined the walls. Both the Terran and diplomatic delegations had been summoned, standing in separate groups and watching with obvious alarm. Queen Wu stared down at them from her throne. Her anger radiated like heat. When she spoke, her voice echoed through the chamber. "I will ask this question once, and I expect the complete truth." Her eyes fixed on Sung with laser intensity. "Why does my daughter call you husband, human?" The question hung in the air. Every eye in the throne room turned to Sung. He felt the weight of their stares, the hostility from nobles, the concern from Terran diplomats. His career, his life, possibly the entire peace negotiations hung on his answer. He looked at who watched him with those violet eyes full of love and fear. He looked at Duh, the daughter he had not known existed until minutes ago, who had his smile and grace. He touched the crystal at his neck, warm and bright now that all three of them stood together. Sung stepped forward and met the queen's fierce gaze without flinching. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "Because I am her husband, your majesty, and I love her more than life itself." The throne room remained silent after Sung's declaration. Queen Wu's expression was unreadable, carved from stone. Then she laughed, a sound without humor that echoed off the crystal walls. You claim to be husband to a princess of Prime, you, a human who appeared from nowhere. Her voice dripped with contempt. Explain yourself before I have you executed for this insult. Sung did not flinch. He had survived a ship explosion, a crash landing, solar radiation storms, and 5 years of dangerous exploration. He would not be intimidated now, not when and his daughter needed him. He began to speak. He told them everything: the crash on 7, Findings Research Station, the weeks of learning to communicate, to trust, to survive together, the solar flare warning and their desperate work to build a shelter, the growing bond between two outcasts from different worlds. He described the night under the twin moons when it asked him to perform the eternity binding. He pulled out his crystal, showing how it glowed in response to his presence. He admitted his ignorance at the time, how he had not understood the depth of the commitment he was making. I thought it was like a human engagement, he said honestly. I did not know it was a sacred bond that would connect our souls, but I would make the same choice again, knowing everything. Because is the bravest, kindest, most brilliant person I have ever met. Loving her was not a choice. It was inevitable. Stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. He speaks the truth, Mother. I performed the eternity binding willingly, knowingly. I chose him, as our ancestors taught us to choose when we find the one soul meant for ours. She pulled out the broken crystal, the one the guards had torn from her neck 5 years ago. You took this from me. You separated us by force, but you cannot break what was formed under sacred moons with sacred words. The bond exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Queen Wu's face darkened. You bound yourself to an alien without permission, without consideration for your duties or your family's honor. And then you, her eyes moved to Da. Then you bore a hybrid child and hid her from me for 5 years. I had no choice, his composure cracked. You would have killed her. You would have called her an abomination and destroyed the only part of Sung I had left. I protected my daughter the only way I could. The queen rose from her throne, descending the steps with controlled fury. She approached Da, who stood calmly between her parents. The child looked up at her grandmother without fear. What are you, child? The queen asked, her voice softer but no less intense. Da tilted her head, considering. I am your granddaughter. I am an human. I am proof that different peoples can become one family. She reached out and took the queen's hand. And I can do this. The child closed her eyes. Her psionic abilities activated, stronger than anyone expected from one so young. Harmonic frequencies filled the throne room, visible as ripples of light that danced through the air. The light touched each person present, carrying with it a wave of emotion: love, hope, understanding, peace. The effect was stunning. Nobles gasped. Terran diplomats stared in wonder. The light wove patterns that no pure human could create, blending psionic sensitivity with human creativity into something entirely new and beautiful. When Do opened her eyes, the throne room remained silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. The child had demonstrated power and potential that neither species possessed alone. Queen Wu stared at her granddaughter with an expression impossible to read. Then she turned to face her assembled court. The eternity binding is sacred law, unchanged for 10,000 years. If my daughter truly performed this ritual with proper intent, then according to our most ancient traditions, the bond is legitimate. She paused, her jaw tight. But this human must prove himself worthy of joining our royal family. Hope flickered in Sung's chest, quickly followed by apprehension. The queen smiled coldly. You will undergo the crucible of stars, the same trial all potential royal consorts must face. It will test your mind, your body, your character, and your resolve. Most candidates fail. I expect a human will not survive the first challenge. Grabbed his arm. Mother, no. The crucible is designed for with enhanced strength and psionic abilities. A human cannot. Then he will fail, the the queen interrupted, and this farce will end. But if he somehow succeeds, I will acknowledge your bond and accept him into this family." Her eyes challenged Sung. "Do you accept these terms, human?" Sung looked at the fear and desperate hope in her face. He looked at Da, his daughter who he had just met but already loved fiercely. He touched the crystal at his neck, feeling its warmth. "I accept, your majesty." The crucible began the next day. The first challenge was an engineering problem that had stumped candidates for generations. Repair a quantum drive with incompatible components while under time pressure. The challenge was designed for beings with psionic sensitivity who could feel the quantum fluctuations. Sung had no such abilities, but he had human ingenuity and 5 years of studying alien technology. He approached the problem differently than any would, using principles of human engineering combined with what had taught him. He solved it in half the allotted time. The second challenge tested combat abilities in zero gravity against automated opponents, had natural advantages in such environments. Sung was smaller, weaker, lacking their enhanced reflexes. But he had trained in Earth's military, had survived encounters with hostile alien fauna, and knew how to use his weaknesses as strengths. He was more agile in zero gravity than larger, could fit through spaces they could not, and used creative tactics that confused the automated systems. He won through strategy rather than strength. Each challenge pushed him to his limits. Tests of moral character where he had to choose between personal gain and ethical action. Puzzles requiring abstract thinking. Endurance trials that left him exhausted and bleeding. Problems designed to exploit cultural knowledge he did not possess. He failed some challenges outright, but he never gave up. When he could not succeed through methods, he found human solutions. When he lacked strength, he used intelligence. When he did not understand their culture, he relied on universal principles of honor and compassion. The nobles who observed the trials began to murmur. This human was different from their assumptions. He was clever, persistent, brave, and honorable. He approached impossible problems with fresh perspectives. He showed grace in failure and humility in victory. The final challenge came after 3 weeks of grueling trials. Sung stood in an arena before the assembled court, exhausted to the point of collapse. His body was covered in bruises and burns from previous challenges, but he stood straight, refusing to show weakness. Queen Wu descended into the arena. "The final trial," she announced, "is simple. Convince me that you truly love my daughter. Convince me that you deserve to be part of this family." Sung took a breath. He had prepared technical arguments, speeches about unity between species, diplomatic appeals. But looking at the queen, he realized none of that would work. She did not care about politics or philosophy. She cared about her daughter. "Your Majesty," he began quietly, "I cannot convince you to accept me. I can only tell you what I know to be true." He pulled out his crystal. "5 years ago, I was dying on a moon far from home. Your daughter could have ignored me, left me to die, protected herself from involvement with an alien. Instead, she saved my life. She taught me her language, shared her research, treated me with kindness when she had no obligation to do so. I fell in love with her brilliance first. The way her mind worked through problems, the passion she had for discovering new things. Then I loved her courage. She had given up everything to pursue her dreams, knowing the cost. And finally, I loved her heart. The gentleness with which she treated even the smallest creatures in that crystal forest. When the solar flare came, we faced death together. We built a shelter with our own hands, trusting each other completely. And under those twin moons, she asked me to bind my soul to hers. I said yes, not because I understood every implication, but because I knew with absolute certainty that my soul was already hers." He looked directly at the queen. "You ask if I deserve her. I don't. She is brilliant, brave, and kind beyond measure. I am just a human who got lucky enough to crash on the right moon. But I will spend every day of my life trying to deserve her love. I will protect her, support her dreams, and honor the sacrifice she made when she chose me over her comfortable life. And our daughter, his voice broke slightly, exists because our bond was real. She is proof that love can bridge any difference, create something beautiful from impossible circumstances. If you reject me, you reject not just a human but the possibility of what our two peoples could become together. Silence filled the arena. Sung swayed, his strength finally giving out. He collapsed to one knee but kept his eyes on the queen. Queen Wu stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, she knelt as well, bringing herself to his level. She reached out and took his crystal, examining it closely. The light it emitted synchronized with his crystal, which the queen had carried since taking it 5 years ago. I was wrong, she said quietly, her voice carrying through the silent arena. I thought you were a threat, an alien who had seduced my daughter through trickery. But watching you these past weeks, hearing your words today, I understand. Chose you because you are worthy of her, and you chose her for all the right reasons. She placed both crystals in his hand and closed his fingers around them. I acknowledge the eternity binding between you and my daughter. I accept you into the royal family of Prime, and I apologize for keeping you apart for 5 years. Ran into the arena, tears streaming down her face. She helped Sung to his feet, and they held each other as if they would never let go again. De joined them, wrapping her small arms around both parents. The throne room erupted in applause from both and human observers. The queen watched her family reunite and felt something ease in her chest. Perhaps this human could teach her people something important about love, sacrifice, and the courage to embrace difference. The peace negotiations that followed were the most successful in history. Sung became an official ambassador, his unique position bridging the gap between species. Resumed her scientific work openly, with her mother's blessing and support. De grew up as a symbol of unity, beloved by both peoples. She possessed her mother's intelligence and her father's adaptability, along with unique abilities that promised to benefit both civilizations. Years later, Queen Wu sat in the palace gardens watching her granddaughter play with children from both species. Sung approached and sat beside her, comfortable now in his role as royal consort. I was harsh with you, the queen said without preamble, that day in the throne room. You were protecting your daughter, Sung replied. I would do the same for Da. The queen nodded slowly. You have proven yourself far beyond what I expected, human. My daughter chose well. I'm the one who got lucky, he said quietly, watching demonstrate a scientific principle to fascinated young students nearby. The queen smiled, a rare expression. Perhaps you both did. She stood, preparing to leave, then paused. Thank you, Sung, for loving her, for being stubborn enough to survive the crucible, for showing us that family is not about species or tradition, but about the bonds we choose to honor. He nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. The queen departed, leaving him to watch his family, his impossible, beautiful family, thriving under purple skies he had once thought he would never see.